In a struggling Chicago restaurant, a young woman was about to make the most impulsive decision of her life. What started as a family Thanksgiving dinner took a shocking turn when she came face to face with public humiliation. Lauren Mitchell wasn't your typical marketing coordinator. For 28 years, she had spent her life disappointing her successful family. Known for her creative problem-solving and quiet resilience. When she encountered her father's crushing words about never owning anything worthwhile, she had no idea she was walking into her destiny. Lauren's response, buying the restaurant on the spot, would lead to a complete transformation of her identity and purpose. What began as spite would become legacy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Lauren Mitchell's phone buzzed with another text from her mother as she sat in her beat-up Honda outside Rossetti's Italian restaurant. "We're already seated. Don't be much later, honey." The message carried that familiar undertone of gentle disappointment that somehow felt worse than outright criticism. 28 years old and still disappointing her family by being 5 minutes late to dinner? Lauren stared at the restaurant's faded red awning, its paint peeling like sunburned skin.
Oh yeah.
The neon sign flickered intermittently, casting uneven shadows across the cracked sidewalk. Even the building seemed tired, worn down by years of economic struggle in this corner of Chicago's changing neighborhoods. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, smoothing down hair that had frizzed in the November humidity. The blazer she'd borrowed from Jessica hung loose on her smaller frame, a constant reminder that she couldn't even afford proper dinner clothes for family gatherings. Her savings account, what little remained after rent and student loans, wouldn't stretch to cover much beyond thrift store finds and clearance rack desperation. The restaurant's interior wrapped around her like a warm, wine-scented embrace as she pushed through the heavy wooden door. Checkered tablecloths and mismatched chairs gave the place a comfortable, lived-in feeling that chain restaurants could never replicate. The walls displayed decades of family photos, 3 generations of Rossettis presiding over countless celebrations and ordinary Tuesday dinners. She spotted her family immediately. They occupied their usual corner table, the one they'd claimed every Thanksgiving for the past 6 years since discovering this hidden gem. Her father's voice carried across the dining room, animated in the way it only got when discussing business successes. The Henderson account alone brought in 40% more than projected, Robert Mitchell was saying as Lauren approached. His steel gray hair was perfectly styled, his suit expensive but not flashy, the uniform of a man who'd built his insurance empire through careful calculation and relentless discipline. Michael looked up first, offering a brief smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Lauren, we were starting to wonder." "Traffic," she lied, sliding into the empty chair between her mother and Jessica. The truth that she'd sat in her car for 10 minutes gathering courage seemed too pathetic to voice. "You remember the Henderson case I mentioned last month?" Michael continued, seamlessly returning to his conversation with their father. "We settled yesterday, 7 figures. Patricia Mitchell reached over to squeeze Lauren's hand, her touch warm but brief. "You look lovely, sweetheart," she murmured. Though Lauren caught the way her mother's eyes lingered on the borrowed blazer, probably recognizing it as Jessica's. Jessica was deep in discussion with her fiancé about their wedding venue, her voice bright with the kind of certainty that had always eluded Lauren. "The ballroom at the Palmer House can accommodate 300 guests," she was saying. "Dr. Matthews thinks we should invite the entire medical staff from Children's." Lauren felt herself shrinking into the familiar role of family observer. She ordered a glass of the house red wine, the cheapest option on the menu, and tried to focus on the conversation swirling around her. But the words felt foreign, like listening to a language she'd once known but had somehow forgotten. The waiter, a young man with kind eyes and nervous energy, took their orders with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to read table dynamics quickly. Lauren noticed how he lingered slightly at their table, probably hoping the well-dressed family would tip generously. She made a mental note to add extra to whatever gratuity the others left. Lauren's been working on some interesting marketing campaigns. Patricia offered during a lull in conversation, her voice carrying the forced brightness of a mother trying to include her quieter child. All eyes turned to Lauren, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. It's nothing major, just helping a startup optimize their social media presence. Social media, Robert repeated, as if testing unfamiliar words. That's not exactly building a career, is it? More like playing around on the internet. It's legitimate marketing, Dad. Companies need digital presence to survive in today's economy. Companies need products and services that solve real problems, Robert countered. Not clever hashtags and Instagram posts. Michael set down his wine glass with careful precision. Actually, our firm just hired a digital marketing specialist, 6-figure starting salary. It's a growing field. Lauren waited for vindication, but it never came. Instead, Robert's expression grew more skeptical. Your firm can afford to throw money at trends. Most businesses need to focus on fundamentals. The conversation moved on, flowing around Lauren like water around a stone. Jessica shared updates about her pediatric residency, describing complex cases with the confidence of someone who saved children's lives for a living. Michael discussed a pro bono case he'd taken, representing a nonprofit that protected wetlands from corporate development. Each story felt like another weight added to Lauren's chest. Her siblings hadn't just found success, they'd found purpose, meaning, respect. They'd become the kinds of people their father could brag about at the country club. Kinds of children who justified years of private school tuition and family investment. The food arrived in generous portions that spoke to the restaurants. Old-school philosophy of value and abundance. Lauren's chicken parmigiana was perfectly prepared. The sauce rich with herbs that transported her briefly away from the table's subtle tension. Lauren sat in the dining room quietly observing the other families around her. They all seemed at ease, effortlessly connected in ways her own family never managed. Her gaze drifted toward the bar, where an older man stood speaking in hushed tones on the phone. His face was drawn with concern. Giuseppe Rossetti, the restaurant's owner, known for his welcoming smile, now looked weary and defeated. I know the deadline, he was saying, his Italian accent thick with sorrow. But please, just let me get through the holidays. This place, it's all I have. Lauren's attention snapped back to her own table as her father Robert raised his voice. He'd finished his second glass of wine, which always sharpened the edge of his words. The problem with your generation, he declared, staring straight at Lauren, is this belief that things should just fall into your lap. That success doesn't require hard work or planning, Patricia said gently. No, Patricia, someone has to tell her the truth. His voice cut through the restaurant, drawing glances from nearby tables. Lauren, you're 28. Your brother bought a house by 25. Jessica finished med school with honors and is marrying a successful man. What have you done? Words struck Lauren like a physical blow. The surrounding tables quieted. Conversations stalled as people became unwilling participants in her public shaming. She noticed a young couple exchange awkward looks. An older woman near the window shook her head with pity. I have a job, Lauren tried to reply. A job that pays you in exposure, not money, Robert interrupted. Right. You're still living off your grandmother's inheritance just to stay afloat. Is that what she intended for you when she left you that money? Mentioning the $150,000 safety net her grandmother had left her felt like a cruel jab. Lauren couldn't find her voice. You drift from job to job, boyfriend to boyfriend, apartment to apartment, he continued. You have no plan, no foundation. At this rate, you'll never own anything that matters. The entire restaurant fell into silence. Even the kitchen noise seemed to pause. Lauren felt the weight of every eye on her, judging her failure not just as a daughter, but as a human being. You'll never own anything worthwhile. The words echoed inside her, pounding alongside her heartbeat. She looked around at her family. Michael looked uncomfortable. Jessica was full of silent pity. Her mother looked on helplessly, and her father sat smugly. Certain his lesson had been necessary. Behind the bar, Gus Rossetti ended his call, and simply stood still, his posture sagging with defeat. When he looked up and met Lauren's gaze, something passed between them. In his eyes, she saw a reflection of her own despair. Two people watching everything they cared about slip away. The room that once felt warm now pressed in on her, thick with embarrassment and failure. Every diner who had overheard her father's tirade seemed to become a silent judge, and her shame weighed heavier by the second. But when she looked at Gus again, something shifted in her. The shame began to burn into something else: resolve. A desperate, fiery determination to prove her father wrong. That moment broke her, and from that breaking point, something stronger began to take shape. Her hands trembled as she pushed her chair back. The sharp sound of wood scraping against the floor slicing through the silence. "Excuse me," she said, voice soft but clear. "I need to use the restroom." She didn't wait for anyone to respond. Her legs were shaky as she crossed the room, every step watched by curious eyes. But instead of heading for the restrooms, she walked straight toward the bar. Gus was still staring at his phone, holding it like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. "Excuse me?" Lauren said, more firmly now. He looked up, his face tired but kind. "Yes, miss. Is something wrong?" She glanced back at her family, Robert still talking, Patricia, watching her with concern but not moving to help. "I overheard part of your call," she said. "You're struggling financially." Gus's expression stiffened, pride battling with the truth. "It's tough these days. All these chains popping up make it harder, but we survive, somehow." Lauren could see through the brave front to the weariness underneath. "How much do you owe?" "Miss, I don't think I want to buy your restaurant." The words came out of her mouth before she'd even fully thought them through. They landed in the space between them with startling weight. Neither of them spoke. But for the first time in a long while, Lauren felt certain about something. Gus blinked several times as if trying to process what he'd heard. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" "I want to buy Rossetti's." Lauren's voice grew stronger with each word. The whole restaurant, everything. From her family's table, she heard her father's voice grow louder. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that keeps people poor. No long-term planning, no consideration of consequences." Something snapped inside Lauren's chest. The burning sensation spread through her entire body, transforming shame into pure, reckless determination. "I have money," she continued, her voice carrying now across the quiet restaurant. "My grandmother left me an inheritance. I can pay cash." Gus stared at her as if she'd just announced she could fly. "Miss, you don't understand. Running a restaurant. It's not something you just decide to do. It takes years to learn. And even then," he gestured helplessly around the dining room. "Look around. We're barely surviving. Then why not sell to someone who can help you survive?" The conversation at her family's table had stopped entirely. Lauren could feel their stares burning into her back, but she refused to turn around. Instead, she focused on Gus's weathered face, on the hope that was beginning to flicker behind his skepticism. "How much?" she asked. "For everything. The business, the equipment, the recipes, the whole operation." Gus's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Behind him, a younger woman emerged from the kitchen, his daughter, Lauren realized, based on the strong family resemblance. She wore chef's whites, splattered with sauce, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Papa," the woman said, approaching cautiously. "Is everything okay? Maria, this young lady?" Gus gestured helplessly toward Lauren. "She wants to buy the restaurant?" Maria's expression shifted from confusion to suspicion. "Buy it, just like that?" She looked Lauren up and down, taking in the borrowed blazer, the carefully maintained composure. "Do you have any experience in the restaurant business?" "No," Lauren admitted. "I have money, and I have motivation." She could hear her father's chair scraping back, knew he was probably preparing to intervene, to save her from her own stupidity. The knowledge spurred her forward. "I have $150,000, she said loudly enough for her family to hear. "Cash, available immediately." The restaurant fell completely silent again. Even the kitchen sounds seemed muted, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Gus's eyes widened. $150,000, yes. Lauren reached into her purse and pulled out her checkbook, her hand surprisingly steady now. "I can write you a check right now for earnest money. We can meet tomorrow to discuss the details." "Lauren," Robert's voice boomed across the restaurant. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She turned then, facing her family shocked. expressions with a calm she didn't know she possessed. "I'm buying something worthwhile, Dad." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Her father's own words thrown back at him in the most dramatic way possible. Michael's mouth hung open. Jessica had gone pale. Patricia looked torn between admiration and terror. But it was Robert's expression that held Lauren's attention. A mixture of shock, anger, and something that might have been respect. "You can't be serious," he said, rising from his chair. "You're going to throw away your inheritance on a failing restaurant out of spite?" "Not spite," Lauren replied, turning back to Gus and Maria. "Investment." She wrote the check with careful precision. $10,000. Earnest money for the purchase of Rossetti's Italian restaurant. Her signature was bold, confident, the signature of someone who owned something worthwhile. Gus stared at the check as if it might disappear. "Miss, are you certain about this?" Lauren looked around the restaurant one more time, at the family photos on the walls, at the other diners still watching the drama unfold, at her own family, frozen in various states of shock and disbelief. "Absolutely certain," she said, handing him the check. As Gus's trembling fingers closed around the piece of paper, Lauren felt something shift fundamentally inside her chest. For the first time in her adult life, she had acted instead of reacted. She had chosen her own path instead of accepting the one others had mapped out for her. The breaking point had become a turning point, and there was no going back now. Lauren's hands shook as she fumbled with her apartment key, the adrenaline from the evening's events finally beginning to ebb. The check she'd written felt like a physical weight in her chest, $10,000 committed to a decision made in anger and desperation. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly since she'd left the restaurant, messages from her family piling up like accusatory stones. She'd turned it to silent during the drive home, needing the quiet to process what she'd just done. The apartment greeted her with its familiar shabbiness, the hand-me-down furniture from college, the kitchen table she'd found on Craigslist, the single window that looked out onto the brick wall of the neighboring building. Everything about this space screamed temporary, transitional, exactly the kind of rootless existence her father had criticized. She poured herself a glass of wine with trembling hands and sank onto her second-hand couch, finally allowing herself to check her phone. 7 missed calls from her mother, 3 from Jessica, 2 text messages from Michael. "Call me and Lauren. We need to talk about this." Nothing from her father. Before she could lose her nerve, she dialed Brandon's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Lauren, it's almost midnight. Are you okay?" "I bought a restaurant tonight." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of Brandon shifting in bed. Him sitting up, running his hands through his messy dark hair the way he always did when processing unexpected information. "I'm sorry, what?" "I bought Rossetti's. It's the Italian place where we had Thanksgiving dinner. I wrote a check for earnest money and everything." "Jesus, Lauren, are you drunk? Stone cold sober?" She took a sip of wine, then reconsidered. "Well, mostly sober." "Okay, I'm coming over." 20 minutes later, Brandon stood in her doorway wearing sweatpants and a Northwestern University t-shirt, his concerned expression reminding her why they'd remained friends through college, and beyond. He'd been her anchor through countless crises, the voice of reason when her impulsiveness threatened to derail her life. "Talk," he said, settling beside her on the couch. Lauren told him everything: her father's public humiliation, the moment she'd seen Gus's desperation, the inexplicable certainty that had driven her to make an offer she couldn't possibly fulfill responsibly. Brandon listened without interrupting, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Lauren," he said finally, "do you have any idea what you've gotten yourself into?" The question she'd been avoiding all evening hit her with full force. "Not really, no." His laptop, his graphic designer's efficiency taking over. "Let's find out." They spent the next 2 hours researching restaurant ownership, diving deep into industry statistics that painted an increasingly bleak picture. Failed within the first year, the average startup costs exceeded $200,000. Food service, required licenses, permits, health inspections, workers' compensation insurance, and a dozen other regulatory requirements Lauren had never considered. "Look at this," Brandon said, pointing to an article about Chicago's restaurant. "Seen average profit margins are between 3 and 5%. That's assuming you're successful. Most places operate at a loss for the first 2 years." Lauren's wine glass sat forgotten on the coffee table as the reality of her situation crystallized. "I don't know anything about running a restaurant." "No, you don't." Brandon's honesty was gentle, but unflinching. "You don't know about food costs, labor management, inventory control, or dealing with suppliers. You've never managed employees, or handled customer complaints, or balanced a restaurant's books." Each point felt like a nail in the coffin of her impulsive decision. "So you think I should back out?" Brandon closed the laptop and studied her face. "I think you should ask yourself why you really did this. Was it to prove something to your dad, or because you actually want to own a restaurant?" The question hung between them, more penetrating than all the industry statistics combined. Lauren closed her eyes, trying to separate her anger at her father from whatever had driven her to approach Gus Rossetti. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe both." Her phone rang, startling them both. Gus Rossetti's name appeared on the screen.
Hello?
She answered, her voice smaller than she intended. "Miss Mitchell? I hope I'm not calling too late. I wanted to speak with you about this afternoon's conversation, of course. I've been thinking about your offer. If you're serious about this, perhaps we could meet tomorrow? I could show you the books, explain the operation, help you understand what you'd be taking on." Lauren looked at Brandon, who was watching her intently. "Yes," she heard herself say. "I'd like that." "Good. Shall we say 10 o'clock? The restaurant is closed Mondays for deep cleaning, so we'll have privacy to talk." After she hung up, Brandon shook his head slowly. "You're really going to do this, aren't you?" "I gave him a check, Brandon. I can't just walk away." "You could stop payment. Tell him you made a mistake, that you acted impulsively." Lauren considered this. It would be the sensible thing to do, the responsible choice her father would probably respect. She could apologize, admit her error, and return to her safe, predictable life of family disappointment and financial uncertainty. The thought of backing down now, of proving her father right about her lack of commitment and follow-through, felt worse than the fear of failure. "What if I don't back out?" she asked. "What if I actually try to make this work?" Brandon was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Then you're going to need a lot of help, and a lot of luck. But it's possible. Anything's possible." "Lauren, the question is whether it's smart." She thought about Gus's worried face, about the 3 generations of family photos on the restaurant's walls, about the warmth she'd felt in that dining room before her father's criticism had poisoned the evening. "Maybe smart isn't the point," she said finally. "Maybe sometimes you have to do something scary and possibly stupid just to prove to yourself that you can." Brandon smiled then, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him all evening. "In that case, we'd better figure out how to run a restaurant." As they reopened the laptop to continue their research, Lauren felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The terrifying, exhilarating possibility that she might be about to change her life entirely. The reality check had revealed the magnitude of her challenge, but it had also revealed something else, her determination to see it through, whatever the cost. Lauren arrived at Rossetti's Monday morning with her laptop bag and a stomach full of nervous energy. The restaurant looked different in daylights, smaller somehow, more vulnerable. The morning sun revealed details she'd missed the night before, faded paint around the window frames. A crack in the front door's glass warned spots in the sidewalk where decades of customers had entered seeking comfort food. She pushed through the unlocked door to find Gus arranging chairs around tables, his movements careful and methodical. The dining room felt hollow, without the warmth of conversation and clinking silverware, like a theater between performances.
"Oh, Miss Mitchell."
Gus straightened, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. Before Gus could respond, the kitchen doors swung open with more force than necessary. Maria Rossetti emerged, her dark eyes assessing Lauren with undisguised skepticism. She'd traded her chef's whites for jeans and a black sweater, but her posture retained the controlled intensity Lauren had noticed the night before. "So you're the one who wants to buy our family's restaurant," Maria said, crossing her arms. "Just like that? It's no experience? No understanding of what this place means?" Maria, Gus warned softly. "No, Papa. She needs to hear this." Maria stepped closer, her voice sharp with protective anger. "This isn't some hobby you can pick up because you had a fight with your daddy. This is 3 generations of my family's blood and sweat." Lauren felt heat rise in her cheeks but forced herself to maintain eye contact. "You're right. I don't understand what this place means to your family. That's why I'm here to learn." Learn. Maria's laugh held no humor. "You think you can learn in a morning what took my grandfather 30 years to build? What my father has spent his whole life maintaining? I think I can try." The simple honesty in Lauren's voice seemed to surprise Maria. Her aggressive stance softened slightly, though suspicion remained in her dark eyes. Gus cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should show Miss Mitchell the operation. Help her understand what she'd be taking on." For the next hour, Gus led Lauren through every corner of Rossetti's. The dining room held 42 seats, he explained, though they rarely filled to capacity anymore. The kitchen was compact, but efficiently designed. With professional-grade equipment that showed decades of careful maintenance, my father bought this stove in 1967, Gus said, patting a massive gas range that dominated one wall. "Still works better than anything they make today." Maria remained silent during the tour, but Lauren caught her watching intently, as if measuring Lauren's reactions to each revelation. In the walk-in cooler, Lauren noticed how meticulously organized everything was, every container labeled, every shelf arranged with military precision. "Who does the ordering?" Lauren asked. "I do," Maria replied curtly. "Food costs, portion control, menu planning, all of it." "She's the real chef," Gus added with obvious pride. "Went to culinary school, worked in some of the best kitchens in Chicago, came back when I got sick 2 years ago." Lauren caught the flash of pain that crossed Maria's face before she looked away. There were layers of sacrifice here, dreams. Deferred for family obligation, they settled at a corner table with 3 thick binders of financial records. The numbers told a story of slow decline, steady revenue drops over the past 5 years as corporate chains moved into the neighborhood, rising food costs that couldn't be passed entirely to customers, mounting debt that grew like a cancer. "The building lease expires in 18 months, Gus explained. "The landlord wants to triple the rent, says the neighborhood's improving, which means people like us get pushed out." Lauren studied the profit and loss statements, her marketing background helping her recognize patterns in the data. "You're not marketing to the right demographic. These numbers show your busiest nights are when you have live music or special events. We can't afford marketing," Maria said flatly. "We can barely afford to keep the lights on." "But look at your Yelp reviews." Lauren pulled out her phone. 4.5 stars. "People love the food, love the atmosphere. You're not lacking quality, you're lacking visibility." Gus and Maria exchanged glances. "You think you can fix that?" Maria asked, her tone skeptical but no longer openly hostile. "I think we can try." Lauren caught herself using "we" and felt a flush of embarrassment. "I mean, if we move forward?" "With this, the books show the restaurant owes about $80,000 in various debts," Gus said quietly. "Equipment loans, supplier accounts, back taxes. Any buyer would need to assume those obligations." Lauren's inheritance suddenly felt much smaller. $80,000 in debt plus whatever the restaurant itself was worth. She was looking at spending nearly everything her grandmother had left her. "What would you want for the business itself?" she asked. Gus was quiet for a long moment. $60,000 for the recipes, the client list, the reputation, everything. $140,000 total. Lauren's entire safety net, plus the earnest money she'd already committed. "The equipment alone is worth more than that," Maria said, surprising everyone by defending her father's low asking price. "The equipment won't keep the family legacy alive," Gus replied. "Miss Mitchell, I need to ask you something directly. Why do you really want to do this?" Lauren looked around the restaurant, at the family photos on the walls, at the evidence of decades of care and tradition, at Maria's fierce protectiveness, and Gus's quiet desperation. "'Cause last night my father told me I'd never own anything worthwhile," she said finally. "Sitting here, seeing what you've built, understanding what it means to this neighborhood, I think he was wrong about what makes something worthwhile." Maria studied Lauren's face for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she stood and walked toward the kitchen. "Come on," she called back. "If you're serious about this, you need to understand how lunch service works." Lauren followed her into the kitchen, where Maria began pulling ingredients from the walk-in cooler with practiced efficiency. "Lunch prep starts at 9, Maria said, handing Lauren an apron. "We'll see if you can keep up." As Lauren tied the apron around her waist, she realized this was her first real test. Not of her finances or her business plan, but of her willingness to work, to learn, to earn the right to be here. The breaking point had led to an impulsive purchase. Now came the harder part, proving she deserved what she was trying to buy. Lauren's first week at Rossetti's felt like drinking from a fire hose while learning to juggle. Every day brought it new humiliations and small victories, each one watched by a staff that seemed divided between amusement and genuine concern for their futures. Maria had assigned her the most basic task-shopping vegetables, rolling silverware, wiping down tables, but even these simple jobs revealed the depth of Lauren's inexperience. Her knife skills were embarrassingly slow, her table settings inconsistent, her attempts at food running clumsy and inefficient. "Corner," shouted Carlos, the line cook, as he rushed past Lauren with a tray of steaming plates. She pressed herself against the wall, still learning the kitchen's intricate dance of bodies and hot surfaces. "You're blocking the pass, Maria," called out without looking up from the sauté pan where she was preparing chicken piccata. "Stand there, you're in everyone's way." Lauren moved to what she hoped was a safer spot, only to hear Luis, the prep cook, mutter something in Spanish that made Carlos laugh. She was fairly certain it wasn't complimentary, but she kept showing up. Every morning at 8:30, every afternoon until closing, her hands developed burns from grabbing hot plates incorrectly, cuts from her still clumsy knife work, and a permanent ache from standing for 10-hour shifts in shoes never designed for restaurant work. The real test came on a Friday evening that started normally enough. Lauren had graduated to taking orders, simple ones. At tables she couldn't possibly mess up too badly. The dining room was comfortably busy, filled with the usual mix of neighborhood regulars and adventurous couples who'd discovered Rossetti's through word of mouth. Then everything went wrong at once. The ticket printer jammed just as the dinner rush began. Carlos called in sick, leaving Maria short-handed in the kitchen. A party of 8 arrived without a reservation, demanding to be seated immediately. And worst of all, Lauren overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "I think that's him," whispered Angela, their most experienced server, nodding toward a middle-aged man sitting alone at table 7. "Food critic from the Tribune? I've seen his picture." Lauren's stomach dropped. Marcus Dunn, whose reviews could make or break a Chicago restaurant, sat calmly reading through Rossetti's menu while chaos erupted around him. "Does Maria know?" Lauren asked. "She's too busy trying to keep up without Carlos. We're already running 20 minutes behind on tickets." Lauren made a decision that terrified her. She approached the kitchen pass where Maria was frantically plating orders, sweat beading on her forehead despite the industrial fans. "I can help on the line," Lauren said. Maria looked up, her expression incredulous. "You can barely fold napkins correctly." "I can follow instructions. Just tell me what to do." For a moment, Lauren thought Maria would refuse. Then another ticket printed, and another, and Maria's practical nature overrode her skepticism. "Salad station," Maria said tersely. "Caesar dressing in the squeeze bottle, croutons from the container on your left. Don't overthink it." Lauren threw herself into the rhythm of service, her movements clumsy but determined. She built salads while Maria handled the hotline, calling out orders and firing dishes with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. That's when disaster struck. Lauren reached for a sauté pan that had been sitting over low heat, forgetting to grab a towel. The hot metal seared her palm, and she jerked back instinctively, knocking over a container of olive oil that spread across the floor like a deadly skating rink. "Fire!" someone shouted as the oil hit the open flame of a gas burner. Lauren watched in horror as a small flame erupted near the stove. For one terrifying moment, she thought she'd burned down the restaurant her first week of ownership. Then Maria moved with the calm efficiency of someone who'd handled kitchen emergencies before. She turned off the gas, smothered the flame with a damp towel, and began barking orders to clean up the mess. Luis, get the mop. Angela, we need new plates for table 4. These got oil on them. Lauren, ice on that burn, then get back to salads. We've got a critic out there, and I'll be damned if we're going to embarrass ourselves. The next hour passed. In a blur of controlled chaos, Loren worked through the pain in her burned hand, building salads and fetching ingredients, while Maria single-handedly kept the kitchen from falling apart. Angela and the other servers moved with increased urgency, determined to compensate for the delays. By the time Marcus Dunn finished his meal and left without speaking to anyone or revealing his identity, Lauren felt like she'd survived a natural disaster. The staff gathered around the kitchen island after closing, sharing a bottle of wine that Maria had opened from the bar. It's not bad for a rich girl, Carlos said, grinning at Lauren despite having called in sick. He'd shown up halfway through the crisis, claiming he'd felt better and heard they needed help. The critics seemed happy enough, Angela added. Clean plates, no complaints. Lauren examined her bandaged palm, still throbbing from the burn. I'm sorry about the oil and the fire. Probably a dozen other things I did wrong. You didn't run, Maria said quietly. When it got hard, when you got hurt, you didn't give up and walk away? There was something different in Maria's voice, not warmth exactly, but a grudging respect that hadn't been there before. Does this mean I passed some kind of test? Lauren asked. It means you survived your first Friday night, Maria replied. Ask me again after you've survived a month. But as Lauren drove home that night, her hands still aching and her chef's coat stained with sauce and sweat, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of having earned her place, even if just for one evening. The trial by fire had singed her, literally and figuratively. But she was still standing, still learning, still determined to prove that some things were worth the burn. Lauren knew she was drowning. 3 weeks into restaurant ownership, she'd mastered the basics of service but remained completely lost. When it came to the business side of operations, the financial records Gus had shown her were just numbers on paper. She needed someone who could translate them into actionable strategy. You need professional help, Brandon had told her over coffee, reviewing her hastily scribbled notes about food costs and labor percentages. This isn't something you can figure out through trial and error. That's how she found herself sitting in a cramped office above a bakery in Lincoln Park, waiting to meet Daniel Foster. The restaurant consultant came highly recommended, though. His fees made Lauren's remaining inheritance seem even smaller. Miss Mitchell, a voice called from the inner office. Daniel Foster was younger than she'd expected, early 30s, with the kind of casual confidence that came from experience rather than arrogance. His office walls displayed framed articles from restaurant industry, publications and photos of successful establishments he'd helped launch or save. I have to ask, he said after they'd settled across from each other, why do you want to own a restaurant? The question felt familiar, but coming from him it carried professional weight rather than personal judgment. Is that relevant to whether? You'll help me? Absolutely. Restaurant consulting isn't about teaching someone to follow a business plan. It's about understanding why you're willing to work 18-hour days for the chance to maybe break even. Lauren found herself telling him about Thanksgiving dinner, about her father's dismissive words, about the moment she'd seen Gus's desperation and recognized something of herself in it. Daniel listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. So this started as spite. I suppose it did. And now? Lauren considered the question. Now it's more complicated. I've seen what the restaurant means to the neighborhood, to the people who work there. It's not just about proving my father wrong anymore. Good, Daniel said, because spite won't carry you through health department inspections and quarterly tax filings. He pulled out a thick folder labeled Rossetti's. Apparently he'd done his homework before their meeting. I drove by yesterday, he said. Classic family operation, good bones, terrible marketing. Your location is decent, but not great. Neighborhood is gentrifying, which means opportunity and risk in equal measure. Lauren watched him flip through pages of analysis, struck by how clinical his assessment felt after weeks of emotional investment. The books show you're bleeding money, Daniel continued. Food costs are too high, labor efficiency is poor, and you're not maximizing revenue during peak hours. Maria mentioned the food costs. She says supplier prices have been rising. They have, but that's not the real problem. Daniel showed her a spreadsheet comparing Rossetti's numbers to industry standards. You're overportioning, which guests love, but kills profitability. Your staff scheduling is inefficient to many people during slow periods, not enough during rush, and you're severely underpricing given your food quality. Each criticism felt personal, like an attack on the family she'd grown to care about. The Rossettis have been doing this for 3 generations. They know their business. They know how to cook, and they know how to serve guests, Daniel corrected. But knowing how to run a restaurant and knowing how to operate a profitable business are different skills. He pulled out his laptop and opened a presentation that looked like it could save or destroy everything she'd invested in. Here's what I see. Rossetti's has incredible potential. The food is excellent, the service is personal, and you have genuine neighborhood loyalty. Without immediate changes, you'll be bankrupt within 6 months. The word bankrupt hit Lauren. Like cold water. What kind of changes? Daniel walked her through a comprehensive plan that felt overwhelming in its scope. Menu engineering to optimize profit margins, staff restructuring to improve efficiency, marketing strategies to attract new customers while keeping loyal regulars, technology upgrades to streamline operations. This would require significant additional investment, Lauren said, studying the projected costs. About $40,000 spread over 6 months. Less than you'd lose by continuing current operations. Lauren thought about her remaining inheritance. Already depleted by the restaurant purchase and daily operating costs. And if I implement all this, what are the chances of success? Define success. Profitability, stability, not going bankrupt. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Honestly, maybe 60%? Restaurant failure rates are brutal, even with perfect execution. The honesty was refreshing after weeks of optimistic encouragement from friends and family. Why would you take on a client with 60% odds? Because I recognize something in you that most restaurant owners don't have? Which is, you're not in love with the romance of restaurant ownership. You're not here because you think it'll be fun or glamorous. You're here because you need to prove something to yourself, and that kind of motivation can overcome a lot of obstacles. Lauren found herself warming to his straightforward approach. No condescension about her inexperience, no speeches about following her passion, honest assessment, and practical solutions. There's something else, Daniel added, his professional demeanor softening slightly. I lost my own restaurant 2 years ago. Pandemic lockdowns, rent we couldn't pay, suppliers demanding cash up front. Everything I'd built for 5 years, gone. In 3 months. I'm sorry. The point is, I know what it feels like to watch something you've invested everything in slip away. If there's a chance to save Rossetti's, to keep that from happening to you and to the Rossetti family, I want to help. Lauren studied his face, seeing past the consultant's polished exterior to something more personal, more vulnerable. What's your fee structure? Flat rate of $15,000 for 6 months of intensive consulting, plus percentage of any profit improvement above current baseline. It was expensive but fair, especially given his obvious expertise and personal investment in the outcome. I'll need to discuss this with Maria and Gus, Lauren said. Any changes will affect them directly. Of course, but Lauren. Daniel used her first name for the first time. Don't wait too long to decide. The numbers don't lie. Time is the one thing you can't afford to waste. As Lauren left his office, she felt the familiar mixture of terror and excitement that had become her constant companion. Professional guidance offered hope, but it also made clear how precarious her situation really was. The trial by fire had taught her to survive day-to-day operations. Now she needed to learn whether survival was enough, or if she could actually build something that would last. The business plan Daniel had prepared sat on the table at Rossetti's like a judgment. Its pages filled with recommendations that would transform everything about the restaurant's operations. Lauren, Maria, and Gus had spent the morning reviewing each section, the weight of necessary changes settling over them like storm clouds. 20% reduction in portion sizes, Maria read aloud, her voice tight with disapproval. Elimination of 3 menu items that don't meet profit margin requirements. Modified sauce recipes to reduce food costs. These are my grandmother's recipes, Gus said quietly, touching the menu as if it were something sacred. Her ragu, her osso buco. Lauren felt the crushing weight of responsibility. Every decision would affect not just her investment, but the livelihoods of 8 employees and the legacy of a family that had trusted her with their life's work. The numbers don't lie, she said, echoing Daniel's words. We can honor your grandmother's memory by keeping the restaurant alive, even if we have to modify some things. Maria's laugh was bitter. Modify. Such a gentle word for destroying everything that makes this place special. Maria, no, Lauren? You don't understand. These aren't just recipes. They're stories. My grandmother teaching my father to brown the meat just so, to let the sauce simmer for exactly 3 hours. My first day in this kitchen, learning to fold ravioli the way she did when she was 16 and homesick for Italy. The pain in Maria's voice made Lauren's chest tighten. She was asking them to sacrifice pieces of their soul for the sake of profit margins and efficiency metrics. What if we compromise? Lauren suggested. Keep the signature dishes exactly as they are, but streamline the ones that aren't family. Specialties. Daniel, who had remained silent during their discussion, finally spoke. Compromise is how restaurants die slowly instead of quickly. You either commit to change, or you accept failure. The harsh truth silenced them all. Lauren looked around the dining room, imagining it empty, the family photos packed away, the warm atmosphere replaced by the sterile efficiency of whatever chain restaurant would eventually take over the space. Implement the changes. She decided. All of them. The staff meeting that afternoon was one of the most difficult conversations Lauren had ever navigated. The employees gathered around the large corner table, their faces reflecting varying degrees of concern and suspicion. Some of you have been here for years, Lauren began, her prepared speech feeling inadequate. This restaurant is more than just a job to you, its family. But we're facing financial realities that require immediate action. She explained the new scheduling system that would reduce labor costs by 30%. Instead of having 4 servers during slow lunch periods, they'd operate with 2. Kitchen staff would be cross-trained to handle multiple stations, eliminating redundancy. What about overtime? Asked Angela, their head server. I've been working doubles here for 3 years. Overtime will be eliminated, Lauren replied. Watching Angela's face fall, we'll hire part-time staff to cover gaps instead. The room grew quiet. These people had families, rent payments, children to feed. Her business decisions would directly impact their ability to survive. I'm sorry, Lauren continued, but we also need to let 3 people go immediately. Alina Miguel and Tony Wheel provide 2 weeks severance and strong references. Alina, who had been folding napkins at Rossetti's for 5 years, began to cry quietly. Tony, a prep cook who'd recently become a father, stared at the table in stunned silence. This is necessary to save the restaurant and the remaining jobs, Lauren said, her voice barely steady. I know it doesn't make it easier, but easy for you to say, Tony interrupted, his voice sharp with anger. You waltz in here with your inheritance money, playing restaurant owner while real people lose their jobs. The accusation hit Lauren like a physical blow. Tony, I understand you're upset, do you? Do you understand what it's like to tell your wife you can't pay rent because some rich girl is playing with her trust fund? Maria stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. That's enough, Tony. This isn't Lauren's fault. The restaurant was failing before she got here. But it was still operating, Tony shot back, still employing people who needed work. The meeting ended with strained goodbyes and promises to maintain contact. Lauren watched Alina pack her personal items from the employee locker, each item, feeling like another weight added to her conscience. That evening, Lauren sat in her apartment staring at the latest financial projections. The layoffs would save approximately $4,000 per month. The menu changes would improve profit margins by 15%. The new scheduling system would reduce labor costs while maintaining service quality. Her phone rang. Robert Mitchell's name appeared on the screen. I heard about your restaurant troubles, he said without preamble. Michael mentioned you're making staff cuts. Lauren felt defensive anger rising. How does Michael know about my business decisions? Word travels. Small business struggles aren't exactly secret in this city. His voice carried the familiar tone of disappointment. Are you ready to admit this was a mistake? Making the difficult decisions necessary to save the restaurant. You're playing with other people's lives, Lauren. These employees you're firing, they have real responsibilities, real bills to pay. Your little rebellion is costing them their livelihoods. The criticism stung because it echoed her own doubts. What would you have me do? Let the restaurant fail completely and everyone loses their jobs. I'd have you think before acting. Consider consequences before making impulsive decisions that affect innocent people. After he hung up, Lauren sat in the dark of her apartment, wondering if Tony and her father were right. Maybe she was just a privileged girl, playing with other people's lives, making decisions from a position of financial safety that the people she employed would never have. But the next morning she returned to Rossetti's, determined to prove that the painful choices would lead to something better. Maria greeted her with coffee and a revised prep schedule that would accommodate their reduced staff. Alina stopped by this morning, Maria said. She wanted me to tell you she understands why you had to let her go. She hopes the restaurant makes it. The grace in Elena's message made Lauren's eyes blur with tears. She was learning that leadership meant carrying the weight of other people's pain, that sometimes doing right by the majority meant causing harm to individuals she cared about. The hard choices had been made. Now came the harder part, living with them while building something worthy of the sacrifice. 3 months after the layoffs, Rossetti's was finally showing signs of life. The streamlined menu had improved efficiency, without completely sacrificing the restaurant's character, and Daniel's marketing strategies were bringing in new customers while retaining the neighborhood regulars. Lauren had begun to believe they might actually survive. Then everything fell apart in a single morning. Lauren arrived at the restaurant to find Maria pacing behind the bar, her phone pressed to her ear and her face pale with anger. No, you listen to me, Maria was saying. Tony worked here for 2 years without a single complaint. This is retaliation. Pure and simple. Lauren's stomach dropped. What's happening? Maria ended her call and turned to Lauren with an expression that mixed fury with something close to panic. Tony filed complaints with the health department and the labor board. Claims we've been operating with violations for months. Oh, what? Kind of violations? Everything he could think of. Proper food storage temperatures, inadequate employee break policies, failure to maintain required documentation. Most of it is bullshit, but some. Maria trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Some of what? Some of the record keeping has been sloppy. Gus isn't great with paperwork, and when you took over, we were too busy implementing changes to catch up on documentation. Lauren felt the walls closing in. Health department violations could shut them down immediately. Complaints could result in massive fines and legal fees they couldn't afford. When are the inspections? Health department this afternoon. Labor board investigator sometime this week. Lauren's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Miss Mitchell, this is Jennifer Chen from Channel 7 News. We're doing a story about restaurant working conditions in Chicago. We'd like to get your response to some serious allegations. I'm sorry, what allegations? A former employee claims you've been cutting corners on food safety and employee rights to boost profits. He says you fired longtime workers to hire cheaper, less experienced staff. Would you like to comment? Lauren ended the call without responding, her hands shaking. It's going to be on the news. Maria sank onto a bar stool. This will destroy us. Even if we pass the inspections, even if the complaints are dismissed, the publicity alone. The front door chimed, and Daniel Foster entered with his usual, efficient energy. His expression changed when he saw their faces. What's wrong? Lauren explained the situation while Daniel listened with growing concern. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. This is bad, he said finally. It's not necessarily fatal. We need to move fast. The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic preparation. Daniel helped them organize every piece of documentation the inspectors might request. Maria and Lauren deep cleaned every corner of the kitchen, checking temperatures and dating every container. Gus arrived mid-morning and Lauren had to explain the crisis to a man who'd never faced anything like this in 40 years of operation. "Tony is a good boy," Gus said sadly. "Angry but good. I don't understand why he would do this." "Because he's hurt and he wants to hurt us back," Maria replied. "And because Lauren makes an easy target rich girl playing restaurant owner." The health inspector arrived at 2 o'clock sharp. Margaret Walsh was a middle-aged woman with steel-gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen every trick restaurants use to hide violations. Lauren watched helplessly as Inspector Walsh moved through the kitchen with clinical precision, checking temperatures, examining storage procedures, reviewing logs. Every pause to make a note felt like a potential death sentence. "You're walking. Refrigerator is running 2 degrees warmer than regulations require," she said, making a mark on her clipboard. "We can adjust that immediately," Maria said quickly. "I'm also seeing some inconsistencies in your temperature logs from last month." Lauren's heart sank. Those were from the period right after the layoffs, when everyone was scrambling to adapt to new responsibilities. The inspection continued for 2 hours. Inspector Walsh found 3 minor violations: the refrigerator temperature, incomplete documentation from the previous month, and a small crack in one food prep surface that needed repair. "These are correctable violations," she said finally. "You have 72 hours to address them and provide documentation of compliance. Failure to do so will result in closure pending full re-inspection." After she left, Lauren collapsed into a chair, emotionally drained. 3 violations wasn't devastating, but the 72-hour deadline was tight, and they still faced the labor board investigation. "We can handle this," Daniel said, already making notes about required repairs and documentation. "The violations are minor, easily fixed." That evening, as they worked late to prepare for the labor board investigator, Lauren's phone buzzed with notifications. The news story had aired, and social media was picking up the coverage. "Young entrepreneur faces serious allegations about restaurant working conditions. Another rich millennial playing with working-class jobs," Rossetti's accused, "of putting profits over people." Lauren scrolled through comments that ranged from sympathetic to scathing. Some defended her efforts to save a struggling restaurant, while others echoed Tony's accusations about privileged outsiders exploiting longtime employees. "Don't read that garbage," Maria said, noticing Lauren's phone. "Half these people have never run a business in their lives." But the damage was visible in other ways. 2 reservation cancellations came in during the evening service. A group of regular customers seemed uncomfortable, whispering among themselves and glancing toward the kitchen. Maggie Sullivan, the retired teacher who'd become one of Lauren's strongest supporters, stopped by during the dinner rush. "Honey," she said, pulling Lauren aside, "I wanted you to know that some of us in the neighborhood are organizing a response. Tony's accusations don't match what we've seen here." "Maggie, you don't need to." "Yes, we do. This restaurant matters to this community. You've done right by us, and we're not going to let one angry man destroy that." As the evening wound down, Lauren stood at the kitchen pass, watching Maria coordinate the remaining orders with calm efficiency. The crisis had revealed something important. They weren't just fighting for a business anymore. They were fighting for a community asset, a gathering place that meant something to people beyond profit and loss. The allegations stung because they contained enough truth to be credible. She had made difficult decisions that affected people's lives. She was relatively privileged compared to most of her employees. But she was also learning that leadership meant accepting responsibility for imperfect choices in an imperfect world. The crisis point had arrived, testing everything they'd built and forcing them to prove their value not just as a business, but as a positive force in their community. The next 72 hours would determine whether that proof was enough. The labor board investigator arrived on a gray Thursday morning, her demeanor professional but skeptical. Sarah Kim was younger than Lauren had expected, sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the restaurant's operation. "I'm here to investigate claims of unfair labor practices and unsafe working conditions," she said, settling at a corner table with a thick folder of documentation. "I'll need to speak with current employees privately. review your records, and examine workplace policies. Lauren had spent the previous 2 days preparing for this moment, but watching Kim interview Maria Carlos, the other staff members felt like waiting for a jury verdict. Each conversation took place behind closed doors, leaving Lauren to imagine the worst. Daniel had coached her on how to respond to questions, but theory felt inadequate when facing the reality of a woman who could shut down her restaurant with a single report. Miss Mitchell, Kim called her over after finishing the staff interviews. Let's discuss your employment practices. The questioning was thorough and uncomfortable. Kim examined every decision Lauren had made since taking over the layoffs, the schedule changes, the new policies. Her tone remained neutral, but Lauren could feel the scrutiny like a weight on her chest. Several former employees alleged that you eliminated their positions solely to reduce labor costs, without regard for their seniority or performance, Kim said. The restaurant was losing money. They had to reduce expenses to avoid complete closure, Lauren replied, her voice steadier than she felt. But you chose to eliminate positions held by longtime employees rather than finding other cost-cutting measures. We cut costs across every category: food, supplies, utilities. Labor was just one area where reductions were necessary. Kim made notes without revealing her thoughts. Your former prep cook, Tony Vasquez, claims he was terminated for questioning new policies, not for performance reasons. Lauren remembered Tony's anger during the staff meeting, his accusation about her playing with other people's lives. Tony was let go as part of necessary workforce reductions. His position was eliminated, not just his employment. Hired 2 part-time workers shortly after his termination. The observation felt like a trap. It restructured to use part-time staff during peak periods rather than full-time employees working overtime. It reduced overall labor costs while maintaining service levels. Kim's questions continued for another hour, covering everything from break policies to wage calculations. Lauren answered as honestly as possible, but each question felt designed to expose the inexperience and privilege that Tony had accused her of. That afternoon, the health department reinspection went smoothly. The refrigerator repairs had been completed, the documentation updated, and the cracked prep surface replaced. Inspector Walsh seemed satisfied with their compliance efforts. Violations have been satisfactorily corrected, she announced. Your operating permit remains valid. One crisis averted. But the labor investigation remained pending, and the media attention continued to affect business. Dinner reservations were down 30% from the previous week. Lauren was cleaning glasses behind the bar when her phone rang. Her mother's name appeared on the screen. Lauren, honey, your father and I saw the news story. Are you all right? The concern in Patricia's voice nearly broke Lauren's composure. I'm fine, Mom. Just dealing with some challenges. Hey, your father wants to talk to you. Before Lauren could object, Robert's voice came through the phone. Lauren, this has gone far enough. It's time to admit this isn't working and cut your losses. The health inspection passed. The violations were minor. What? I'm not talking about health inspections. I'm talking about the fundamental problem you're in over your head, and innocent people are paying the price. The accusation stung because Lauren had been thinking the same thing. What would you have me do? Sell, there's a restaurant group that's been eyeing properties in your neighborhood. They'd probably pay enough to cover your debts and give you something back from your investment. And the Rossetti family? The employees who still have jobs? The restaurant group would probably keep most of the staff. Gus and Maria would have to find other work, but they're talented. They'll land on their feet. Lauren looked around the dining room at the family photos on the walls. At Maria expertly coordinating the kitchen, at the regular customers who treated this place like a second home. I'm not selling, Dad. Lauren, I said, I'm not selling. This restaurant means something to this neighborhood. It means something to me. I'm not walking away because things got difficult. Robert's sigh carried through the phone. Then you're more stubborn than I thought, more foolish. That evening, as Lauren and Maria closed the restaurant together, the labor investigator's words echoed in her mind. Every decision she'd made could be interpreted as privileged, inexperienced, harmful to working people who depended on their jobs for survival. Do you think I'm doing the right thing? Lauren asked Maria as they finished the final cleaning. Maria paused in wiping down the espresso machine. What do you mean? Tony, the layoffs. all of it. Maybe my father's right. Maybe I'm just playing restaurant owner while real people suffer the consequences. Maria was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. When you first showed up here, I thought you were exactly what Tony says, rich girl with daddy. Issues playing with our lives. Lauren felt her stomach drop, and now I see someone who shows up every day, who burns her hands on hot plates and stays until midnight doing inventory, who cries when she has to fire people but does it anyway because it's necessary. Maria met Lauren's eyes. That's not playing. Lauren, that's owning it. The words carried weight because they came from someone who had every reason to resent. Lauren's presence in her family's restaurant. The labor investigator will make her decision based on facts and regulations, Maria continued. But I know what I see, someone who's learning to lead, making mistakes but fighting for something bigger than herself. As Lauren drove home that night, she realized that the reckoning wasn't just about labor investigations or health inspections. It was about proving to herself that she could handle the weight of responsibility. The complexity of leadership, the pain of making choices that hurt people she cared about.
Ow!
The crisis had tested everything: her resolve, her values, her commitment to the restaurant and its community. She still didn't know whether she'd passed or failed. But she knew one thing with certainty. She wasn't the same person who had impulsively written a check 3 months ago. The reckoning had revealed who she was becoming. Now she had to prove it was enough. 1 year and 3 days after Lauren Mitchell had impulsively purchased Rosetti's Italian restaurant, she stood in the kitchen watching Maria put the finishing touches on a special Thanksgiving menu that honored both tradition and innovation. The Labor Board investigation had concluded 2 months earlier with a finding of no substantial violations. Tony's complaints had been deemed retaliatory rather than substantive. The restaurant had not only survived, but was showing its first consistent monthly profit since Lauren's ownership began. The ossobuco is perfect, Maria announced, lifting the lid on a pot that had been simmering for hours. Known as recipe, but with the cost modifications that actually make it profitable. Lauren smiled at how naturally Maria now spoke about profit margins alongside culinary traditions. The crisis had forced them all to evolve, to find ways to honor the past while building a sustainable future. The dining room buzzed with the controlled energy of a busy holiday service. Every table was reserved, a mixture of longtime regulars and new customers who had discovered Rosetti's through the targeted marketing campaigns Daniel had helped implement. The community support following the labor investigation had been overwhelming. Neighborhood residents, local business owners, and food bloggers had rallied around the restaurant with a fierce loyalty that surprised everyone. "Lauren," called Angela from the host station, "your family just arrived." Lauren's stomach tightened with familiar anxiety, but the feeling was different now, anticipation rather than dread. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked into the dining room, where the Mitchell family was being seated at their usual corner table. Robert looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. Patricia beamed with pride that felt genuine rather than compensatory. Michael and Jessica exchanged glances that seemed more admiring than pitying. "You look good," Patricia said, embracing her daughter. "Professional, like you belong here." Lauren did feel like she belonged. The restaurant hummed around her with the efficiency of a well-tuned machine, but more than that, it felt like home, in a way her apartment never had. "How's business?" Michael asked. And Lauren was struck by how his question sounded genuinely interested, rather than skeptically probing. "Good, really good, actually. Booked solid through New Year's. And the profit margins are finally where they need to be." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Patricia said. "Your father has something he wants to tell you." Lauren looked at Robert, who was studying the updated menu with careful attention. The prices had increased modestly, reflecting the quality of ingredients and preparation, but the core offerings remained recognizably Rosetti's. "The food critic from the Tribune came back last month," Lauren said, settling into the chair across from him. 4 stars. She specifically mentioned how we'd maintained the restaurant's authentic character while improving efficiency and service. Robert set down the menu and met her eyes. "I read the review. I also read the feature article in Cranes about young entrepreneurs revitalizing Chicago's neighborhood restaurant scene." Lauren had been surprised by the Cranes piece, which had focused on her turnaround of Rossetti's as an example of thoughtful business leadership in the hospitality industry. The reporter had interviewed Maria, several longtime customers, and even Maggie Sullivan would become something of an unofficial neighborhood spokesperson for the restaurant. "I need to apologize," Robert said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of humility. "Last year, when I said you'd never own anything worthwhile, I was wrong. Not just about your capabilities, but about what makes something worthwhile." The words Lauren had waited her entire adult life to hear felt surreal in their simplicity. "I built my business by focusing on metrics that were easy to measure," Robert continued. "Revenue, profit margins, asset accumulation. I measured success by how much someone could accumulate and control." "Dad, let me finish. Watching what you've done here, seeing how this place serves the community, how you've provided jobs and preserved something meaningful that's worth more than any quarterly profit report." Lauren felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Around them, the restaurant continued its evening rhythm. Serve, moving efficiently between tables. The gentle clatter of silverware and conversation creating the soundtrack of a successful service. "I'm proud of you," Robert said simply. "Not because you proved me wrong, but because you proved yourself right." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their server Carlos, who had been promoted to head server after Angela left to pursue her nursing degree. Lauren had learned to view staff turnover not as failure, but as success when people moved on to better opportunities. So Lauren, Carlos said with a grin, "Maria wants to know if your family would like to try the new tiramisu recipe. It's her grandmother's version, but she's been perfecting it for weeks." "Absolutely," Lauren replied, warmed by how naturally Carlos included her in the restaurant's extended family. As the evening progressed, Lauren found herself moving between the dining room and kitchen with the fluid ease of someone who truly understood both sides of the operation. She greeted regular customers by name, checked on new diners to ensure their satisfaction, and seamlessly assisted with service when needed. Maggie Sullivan stopped by the table during dessert, her warm presence immediately embracing the Mitchell family. "You must be Lauren's parents," she said to Robert and Patricia. "I hope you know how special your daughter is to this neighborhood. When that awful man tried to destroy her reputation, the whole community rallied around her. That doesn't happen unless someone has earned genuine respect." Robert looked thoughtful as Maggie continued. "This restaurant was dying before Lauren arrived, not just financially, but spiritually. She didn't just save a business, she preserved a gathering place that 3 generations of families have considered their second home." After Maggie moved on to greet other diners, Robert turned to Lauren with an expression of dawning understanding. "How many people work here now?" he asked. 12, counting part-time staff. More than when I started, actually, but with better efficiency and higher wages." "And the Rossetti family?" "Gus is semi-retired, but still comes in 3 days a week. Maria is my partner. Noe restructured 6 months ago to give her equity in the business. She handles all culinary operations while I focus on business development and community relations." Jessica leaned forward, her pediatrician's instincts picking up on something deeper. "You seem happy, Lauren? Really happy, not just successful?" Lauren considered the observation. She was happy in a way that had nothing to do with proving anyone wrong and everything to do with building something meaningful. The work was harder than anything she'd ever done, but it was work that mattered to people beyond herself. "I found my place," she said simply. As the evening wound down and her family prepared to leave, Robert lingered at the table while the others said their goodbyes. "The offer I mentioned months ago," he said quietly. "The restaurant group that wanted to buy this place. Still interested, probably willing to pay significantly more now that you've proven the concept." Lauren looked around the dining room mat, the family photos that now included pictures of her and Maria at various restaurant events, at the customers finishing their meals with the satisfied contentment that came from being truly well-fed, at the staff cleaning up with the pride of people who took ownership in their work. "I'm not selling, Dad. This isn't an investment to flip. It's a legacy to continue." Robert smiled, and for the first time in Lauren's memory, his approval felt genuine rather than conditional. "Good," he said. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." As her family departed and Lauren helped close the restaurant for the evening, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The impulsive purchase had become a careful stewardship. The act of rebellion had evolved into an act of love for the Rossetti family, for the neighborhood, for the idea that success could be measured in community impact rather than just personal achievement. Standing in the quiet dining room after the last customer had left, Lauren realized she had indeed owned something worthwhile. Not just a business, but a purpose. Not just financial success, but the deeper satisfaction of work that mattered. Her father had been wrong about what she could achieve, but he had been right about one thing: ownership meant responsibility. Lauren had learned to carry that weight with grace, and in doing so, had discovered who she was meant to become. The circle was complete, but the story was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.